Why does the brain speak against evolution?
The brain, you've got about roughly 150 or so thousand kilometres of nerve fibres, 86 billion neurons and the same number of supporting cells. You have over 3,000 different brain cell types. You have dozens of different receptors, neurotransmitters. The brain creates the reality you experience through all your bodily senses. And so it's just overwhelming complexity.
Can you take us through the basics of the brain? What's involved here?
Sure. Firstly,
wow, so there's a lot of parts there, a lot of functions, a lot of layers. That's incredible. Why do you think the brain and the mind are separate things?
Well, there's several reasons and they all add up. So firstly,
the human brain has the ability to rewire itself, to heal itself, and to even contemplate its own existence. But is something that complex really just an accident of evolution? I'm here today with Dr. Peter Line, who has a PhD in neuroscience. Peter, can you take us through, to begin with, the basics of the brain? What's involved here?
Sure. Firstly, we got here a couple of models of the brain. So you have, just to give you an orientation, here you have the right side, and you have the left side here. Okay. So just making that clear. Now, if you ever handle a brain, you realise it doesn't feel anything special, and it doesn't look really anything special. It doesn't feel like it's the most complex organisation of matter in the known universe, which is what scientists say it is. But just to give you the basics of it, here at the back here of the brain, you have this what's known as cerebellum, often called the mini brain, and it is involved in sort of balance. It gets a lot of feedback from the vestibular apparatus in your inner ear, and it's also involved in learn motor movements, such as, if you're a gymnast, you learn the routines over and over, and that's the cerebellum helps with that, helps keep balance. It's also thought to be involved, have some role in language and things. At the back here is you have the occipital lobe, which contains your visual cortex here, obviously very important if you want to see. So that's where the information from the optic nerve eventually ends up there via the thalamus, which we'll talk more about later. And you have so each of these lobes, there's one up here, so there's one in this left hemisphere and in the right hemisphere. Okay. So moving up here, you have the parietal lobe here. And basically, it's involved in sort of process of sensory information, spatial awareness, things like that. And you have the somatosensory cortex here, which that gets input from the skin, from things, receptors in the skin, which monitor temperature, pain, pressure, touch, and things like that. And then you move to the frontal lobe here. So first you have the this is known as the precentral gyrus, and that's the motor cortex. So that's where the output, if you want to move an arm or a leg or anything, the signal comes out here. You've got a motor neuron will travel either, say, down to your spinal cord, and it will basically synapse on another motor neuron there, which then goes to your muscles and activate the muscle fibers. What's interesting here is that it's all organised. So, for instance, your hand is next to your wrist, is next to your arm, where basically the output goes, and it's paralleled here in the postcentral gyrus where the sensory information goes to. So it's not like a spaghetti and meatballs arrangement, which if it was an unguided process, why is it so orderly? Everything is neat and packaged like someone designed it that way,
right? So
we could understand it. And then you move on here. Here, this region here is involved in a lot of planning motor movements, known as the premotor cortex. So before it will plan movements and then send it information to the motor cortex, which then sends it down for you to make the movements. And then you have the prefrontal area here, which is cortex, which is less well understood and may have a lot of different functions. Some believe it's involved in sort of more analytical higher cognitive functions. And then if you look at so this is the lateral view. If you look at the medial view, surrounding here, that's kind of known as the limbic lobe here, you have the cingulate gyrus here, and sort of around here, if you go around, it goes the parahippocampal gyrus. But basically, also you have here this white matter here is known as the corpus callosum. That contains about 200 million fibers that interconnect the cortex on each side. So it's like a big relay station. And then you have this is the lateral ventricles that's filled with cerebrospinal fluid. You also have here you have the diencephalon, so that's the thalamus. This is the hypothalamus. We'll talk more about that later. Between them is known as the third ventricle filled with cerebrospinal fluid. And there's also a fourth ventricle here between the pons here. This is the brainstem here, considers a midbrain, pons and medulla, and the spinal cord is down here. And basically, between the pons and medulla and cerebellum is the fourth ventricle, and there's some fluid that goes down the spinal cord known as the central canal. And here you have that's known as the pituitary gland or hypophysis, and we'll also probably talk a little bit more about that later. And so this is a medial view of the brain. So,
and which part is connecting the two hemispheres?
It's this thing here, the corpus callosum here.
Okay.
So you kind of can join. I can join it up here.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'll pull it apart so people can see it.
I hope you're enjoying the interview so far. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching.
Wow. So there's a lot of parts there, a lot of functions, a lot of layers. That's incredible. Peter, you say that this complex organ could not have evolved. Can you maybe walk us through why do you say that?
Yeah. Well, firstly, consider what is involved in it. The estimates on the number of nerve cells, neurons, has varied. The latest count is about 86 billion. And the same with the glial cells, which are the workhorses, which are involved in sort of supporting structures and coding, say, the nerve fibers with myelin, that known as the oligodendrocytes or whatever, and other things that involve immunity and things like that, and so there's about the same order amount of them, and there may be more. So that's the number of neurons. Now, the number of different nerve cells up to just a few years ago used to be thought there was maybe 100 or 200 if you combine neurons and glial cells together, but just a few years ago. They calculated it was 3,300 or more different types of cells in the brain, different types. So that means the number of variables, order complexity increases dramatically.
Okay.
And so that, and then if you connect all the nerve cells up, it's about 100 trillion connections at least. And the amount of fibers is about 150, 180,000 kilometres. So we're dealing with complexity, but it's not random complexity like sands on a seashore. This is functional. It has a function. And the building it has to be, the information has to be encoded in the DNA. Firstly, you have the problem of building this thing, and then you have the problem of it functioning throughout a lifetime. And there's a kind of like a knowledge gap where, I crunched numbers, analysed data for over a decade or more, and you create these pretty maps of the brain and things like that. And that's gone on, and there's the sophisticated functional MRI techniques of seeing what lights up in the brain. But there's still a knowledge gap between what happens. The brain activity basically is just electrical activity going around the brain and certain areas lighting up when you do a certain task. How does that link to thinking, the mind, the cognition? That's elusive at the moment. And so it opens up a lot of areas which have been debated probably for centuries. Is the mind-brain issue, are they the same? Which a lot of materialist views say that you are the brain. When you die, the brain disintegrates. Well, when the brain disintegrates, you disintegrate. There is no mind. Or the dualist view, which tends to believe that your mind lives on. And there's increasing evidence of that today, and things maybe we'll talk a bit more later about things like near-death experiences. And even there's a lot of things about the mind that it cannot be split, and we may talk about some from neurosurgery and things like that about really cases where you can remove a half a hemisphere of the brain and the mind-brain connection will adapt. The hemisphere remaining will take over the functions of the removed hemisphere, and a person can function relatively normally in life and do a high education. And if you met them, you probably wouldn't notice any difference.
Okay, we've raised a lot of issues here. Can we start by exploring in a bit more depth the complexity of the brain? So could you perhaps start by giving us an example of the physical brain complexity that appears to defy evolutionary explanations?
Yeah, well, one thing I like to talk about is when people, because we take everything for granted, our brain and mind, and that everything happens. But when you think about it, all the reality, external reality you experience is really created by your brain. You got environmental signals, whether it's sound, vision, smell from molecules in the air, even things you taste from broken down molecules in your tongue or your upper mouth. Your positioning senses, there's sensors in your muscles called muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs which measure the change of length or in your muscles, and also the force or the change of force in your muscles, and pain, temperature from everything. A lot of things they send the information up to your brain. We are things called action potential, which are basically electrical currents, but they're made of ions. And so the signal they send looks nothing like the information they carry. So the brain has to basically interpret all these electrical currents it receives, and has to then make sense of it. Say vision. So you get the optic nerves. Each optic nerve has roughly about 1 million fibers each. It sends it into the diencephalon, where it crosses over at the optic chiasm, and you have the visual field. So the right visual field on each eye goes to the left hemisphere and vice versa. Okay. They basically get sent to the thalamus, a nucleus called the lateral geniculate nucleus, which then relays it to the visual cortex, the primary visual cortex. But that's just the primary. It then has to send things around because you've got to process different things: colour, shape, 3D depth, motion. You've got to get all these things together, and then so for instance, if you see a blue sphere and a red square, you don't see a red sphere and a blue square. So it has to kind of unify all information, and then it has to merge it with all the other sensory things like what you feel, touch, what you smell, what you hear, and these have other areas that they project into the cortex. And the signal processing, well, we don't understand. So this is at the hardware. Where is it? At the hardware, it's sort of. I've done a lot of signal processing, brain signal, but this is order of magnitude beyond, and it seems to be embedded in the hardware, processing this, and even if you could understand the signal processing, which would be awesome. That would be like explaining, how an integrated circuit board outputs its signal to a TV, to the screen, but the TV can't think about what it sees. So the additional thing is that, and that's where you get into the mind thing, is you can actually detect and think about what you see. So instead of worrying about these millions of signals, how interpreting them, which would overload your brain, you couldn't function. You can say, oh, look, I like the look of that spear. That sunset is beautiful. You can think about what you see. And that's the mind kicking in. And so this is the big thing, and that's the things that defy explanation. It's not physical. Your thoughts aren't physical. They're non-physical. You can't describe the thoughts in terms of equations of physics. So to me that's an example of just overwhelming complexity. And every awake second, you have these millions of bits of information flooding you, and it does this automatic without you having to think about it. You just have to think about what you see or what you feel or what you smell. Those sausages smell and look nice or something, or they don't. And you make a decision about what to do, and that's free will. And that's another thing that they can't, materialists or can't handle free will, that you choose something to do because they say you're a meat robot. You basically don't have free will. You have no choice. That's the materialistic view, again tied to evolution. But of course, no one basically lives that way.
Why would you say that? The materialist doesn't live that way.
I think if you read a book called The Immortal Mind by Michael Egnor, it gives a good example. If you go up and throw coffee over someone's computer, they're going to be unhappy. Well, why did you do that? You say, well, it wasn't me. I had no choice. I'm just a robot, and so it wasn't me doing it. Are they going to accept your explanation? They're probably going to sue you or kick up a fuss because no one can live that way. No one lives out that way. And so...
But if you follow their thinking, that's where it is.
You're basically the mind. To some, the mind doesn't even exist, or it's an epiphenomena of the brain. That's the latest thinking, is the mind doesn't even exist. So I mean, but it's all ways just of getting around the fact that there is a supernatural designer, creator. We call him God, that basically has designed the brain. It's not possible for almost infinite functional complexity to create itself out of a process as brainless as a bacteria or pond scum without design, plan, and purpose. And so, yeah.
Wow. The complexity just seems almost overwhelming, and we've only just started to cover it. Is there another example that you could take us through, Peter?
Yeah, well, I guess the thalamus, which is this part here, so that's known as the relay station as the brain. It seems there's more research done. It seems to have other processes too, but it has about 60 centers or clusters of nuclei, which are groups of neurons clustered together in it. And it receives information from all over, and it relays, most of it goes to the cortex. So it has inputs which are specific to regions, and it sends a lot of it goes to specific regions in the cortex, like the example I gave was the lateral genicular nucleus, which sends visual information from the optic tracts, which it receives, and then sends it to the primary visual cortex.
Okay.
And so for the other sensory information, it'll send it to the places on the somatosensory cortex or wherever relayed there.
Okay.
So it has relay nuclei. It also has diffuse projection nuclei, which are more spread out wise. It's not so localized. That's more involved in sort of keeping you awake, alert, things like that. And that may be signals from the brain stem here, which vital signals. There's nuclei. There's a thing called the reticular formation there, which has about 100 nuclear centers that do different things, everything from keeping you alive by keeping your heart rate going to your breathing, initiating breathing. But also it sends signals up to the thalamus, and even bypass the thalamus, things like the locus coeruleus and raphe nuclei to keep you awake and alert so you don't basically, So it's the sort of different levels of things.
Wow.
But the thing is, and the thalamus also from the cortex has sort of reciprocal connections which go the other way. So if you're overloaded with information, it can sort of ease off on the flow or amount of information sent. So it has return signals, reciprocal. Okay. So the question is, how does that get set up if you're having a telephone exchange or a satellite relay station, would you just put it together blindly? That wouldn't be very good business. and yet it's all really organized. Everything has its region. It's not a spaghetti and meatballs arrangement. It's very, very specific. And so it's like you find a satellite in space and relaying information. You say, well, maybe some meteors crashed together and it just doesn't work that way.
It also sounds like many of the parts are relying on other parts, and even that idea of irreducible complexity, that to imagine this evolving very slowly and bits of it not being complete, it doesn't.
There's a lot of parts you can't get by. Well, you have a pair of thalamus. If they cut out one, you can possibly survive, but you can't survive without two. You have to have it, otherwise you're dead. And of course you have to have the brain stem. The thing is, most of these structures in some form are in all vertebrates. You have the brain stem, the cerebellum. You have what's known as the basal ganglia, which in sort of subcortical structure involved in sort of fine-tuning motor movements and thought to be involved in Parkinson's disease and things like that. You have the diencephalon, the thalamus. Yeah, even most of it has some sort of telencephalon, but not like a human brain. But even lizards and fish, there's a little bit of that there. So all these structure there. So that gets back to the thing where they used to say, the brain stem and basal ganglia, the cerebellum, the lizard brain. But that's just a metaphor used to promote evolution, because these structures also exist in all vertebrates, including fish. So why I say lizard, but it's to protect this idea that there's a primitive brain. But it actually exists in all vertebrates. But the cerebral cortex in humans is very different to what little there is in a fish, which doesn't need it that much, or I guess a lizard. But yeah.
Okay. Peter, can you show us now, what about the hypothalamus? Where's that, and how is that an example of complexity as well?
Okay. Well, the hypothalamus here is situated next to the thalamus. So this is the hypothalamus here. And you can see here this model. There's a pituitary gland here, also known as the hypophysis. Usually there's more of called the pituitary stalk here, or infundibulum here, but maybe they were worried it's going to break off. So but you have this single, it's not a paired structure, it's a single structure pituitary gland here. And basically the hypothalamus produces two hormones, vasopressin and oxytocin, that it sends to the neurohypophysis, which is the posterior pituitary gland, but it has makes some other hormones called releasing hormones. So the example I'll talk about is I'll put these aside. In the hypothalamus, you have the thyrotropin releasing hormone. And so if you got this use this diagram here, so just to show you an example of the sort of, it's a negative feedback loop, which not just in this hormone, but exists in other hormones as well. But I'll give this as a good example. So you have so this is the hypothalamus here, okay? This is the pituitary gland here, which is sort of the anterior would be the more that side, the frontal side. So the hypothalamus produces a thyrotropin releasing hormone, and it gets released into a capillary network at the base of the pituitary stalk, and that goes in these known as portal veins or portal vessels, gets released into a capillary network in the anterior pituitary gland, and then basically from there it acts on these cells in the anterior pituitary gland, which produces or releases the thyroid stimulating hormone, and then this thyroid stimulating hormone is then released in the systemic circulation by these hypophyseal veins here, and it travels around the body and ends up in the thyroid gland here. And the thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the production of two hormones here called T3, which is triiodothyronine, and also T4, which is thyroxine. And so these are released in a systemic circulation. They go around all the body, and they increase metabolism in the body. And thyroid hormones is critical in growth and development, and whether it's bone and brain. So, for example, if you don't have thyroid hormone, you get things like cretinism and things like that. So, but anyhow, so now when it gets too much of this stuff, how it decreases production is that you have this T3, the thyroxine. It goes back through the blood-brain barrier, and it feeds back into the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. And for example, in the hypothalamus, it goes to the nucleus that produces the thyrotropin releasing hormone known as the paraventricular nucleus. And in there, it binds to a receptor complex that attaches to the gene that expresses the thyrotropin releasing hormones that makes the protein, basically. So it binds to that, and that binding causes some conformational change, which causes that it can no longer express that gene, so one can't produce it. And so it then can't stimulate the anterior pituitary to basically produce thyroid-stimulated hormone, which then can't stimulate the thyroid to produce that hormone, so the levels decrease. And
so the whole system's breaking down.
And it's may not be the only feedback system. Like you've got it also feeding into the anterior pituitary directly, and there's other things. It's very complex. But the thing is, how does this and thyroid hormone has to be finely tuned in the body. You can't have too much, too little. It's finely balanced. So you have all these systems set up, and the thing is, with all these variables, the brain's got to control the hormones, and also the number of neurotransmitters, neuroreceptors, brain cells, all are doing different things. And if you're trying to evolve this thing, you've got to select. How can you select for all these things at the same time? Surely there's going to be interference in things, and the thing is, the problem in all of this is, of course, the waiting time problems. You have to wait for the mutations to get into the genetic code, and then once they ever appear, most of the time they may not go anywhere. But if they do, then they have to get in the population and become fixed in both alleles and the chromosomes, the paralleles and the chromosome, the whole population to become fixed, established, and that can take 1 million or more years just for one mutation or something.
So you talked about things needing to be selected at the same time, but then also a mutation needing to occur. Can you just explain to us, Peter, why are we talking about selection and mutations here?
Because everything is supposed to happen by chance mutation. This is not purposefully driven. There's no designer involved. There's no end product involved. No one gives a hoot in basic vernacular. It's just random mutation in the 3 billion letters of the genetic code, and by chance you might get one. But the problem is, if it doesn't have any selecting value, it probably won't go anywhere anyhow. And the problem, if you have so many variables that do different things and probably interfere with one another, how could you ever select for it? Even the age of the universe, which is to be nothing compared to the time it would take to select for this. It actually would never happen. Even if you have infinite multi-universes, it won't happen.
It still won't happen, right? No, so that sounds like it's impossible.
It's just too much because it's all. But they base it on the assumption that evolution is a construct of human mind. It's not a process that's observed. That it actually happens. It's just an invented product.
Hope you're enjoying the interview so far. We'll jump back in shortly. But real quick, imagine bringing this life-changing message to your church or community. This is exactly what we do. We present at close to 1,000 events each year. So many people struggle with how science and the Bible fit together, and it becomes a genuine stumbling block to their faith. But our speakers present satisfying answers that really make sense. We've received hundreds, possibly thousands of testimonies from people who have had their lives changed through our speaking ministry. If you'd like that for your congregation or community, then use the link in the description and contact us today. Peter, what about language? We are talking about these things. I'm listening and understanding what you're saying. How does that come into play?
Yeah, that was a good question. So the first sort of identification area of language in the brain was sort of in the 19th century when basically a guy called Paul Broca sort of examined a patient. I think he could only he damaged part of his brain or something. I think he could only utter the word tan or something like that. And later when he died, they looked at his brain, and I found he had a sort of damage to this inferior frontal cortex here. Mm-hmm. And so he had problems speech output and language. Mm-hmm. And then later, a guy called, surname is Wernicke, then looked at other patients who had a problem understanding language, comprehending it. Mm-hmm. And he found that those patients had a damage to this area here in the sort of posterior superior temporal gyrus here. And it became quite understood that, and there's a loop of nerve fibers that run from this Wernicke's area here around to Broca's area. So it tends to go in this direction. So basically that became the language area of the brain. As technology progressed, they were able to say during neurosurgery, when I guess they were prodding people's brain and things they stimulate the brain to interfere with, found that a lot of areas in the brain would interfere with language, not just those two areas. And they may vary between individuals.
So they're in surgery, yeah, and they're
usually awake because if they're trying to remove something, say they have removed something which may damage language areas or something, vital part of the brain, they may stimulate it to see whether it has any vital functions. I'm not sure.
Right.
So usually the brain itself doesn't have pain receptors in it.
Okay.
But they have to obviously have anesthetics around the scalp and stuff because when you drill in and things. So it sounds pretty gory. But
and then they're stimulating different parts.
Yeah. And so things like Penfield did a lot of this stuff and found that there were a lot of regions were involved in language or when you stimulated, that would interfere with language, although it may vary from person to person, some regions more than others. And then more modern techniques like functional MRI find even the same thing and even more widespread, and like even the cerebellum back here is involved in language. And so you have all these different language regions. We don't really understand, the link about thinking or saying something and electrical activity, but these are the regions that are kind of seem to be involved or interfere with, and even memory, of language in different languages aren't necessarily stored in the same place of the same object. So if you remember a car in Norwegian may have a different area than thinking of a car in English or something like that.
Just because it's a different language.
Yeah. So it's a sort of thing. Now, what's interesting is I guess evolution has different theories about language. Some, I guess, believe it was a slow march to achieve language. Some believe it sort of happened more dramatically, like those that sort of subscribe to the theory of whether it's call it the human revolution or cognitive revolution about, say, 50,000 years ago, some magic mutation or mutations appeared in the brain that gave them these humans about time superior mental capabilities, which allowed them to march out of Africa and gave them a new sort of language. And one guy has called it the trio knowledge mutation, as if sort of, all this structure, which I don't know how many mutations would have to be selected for or incorporated into genetic code to code for language. When you think about it, not just one or two mutations, it's not going to do the job. If it's that widespread, there'll probably be thousands or tens of thousands of mutations needed, and the fixation time will never happen in the AWS universe. It's almost laughable. But I guess if you have that material mindset, then that's what you're left with. And it's a bit like sort of a lightning strike hitting a Volkswagen and upgrading it to Mercedes. It's not going to happen. That's the problem. you often use the brain as a black box, and you can invent any story you like. We call them just so stories, and because you don't have to prove anything, and so but it's just way more complex than that, and you know, if it's encoded in a DNA, you know, it has to be selected for, and I don't know how I can't explain it. I can't explain how you could do that. It would have to be designed. I just don't see how you can gradually incorporate it into the genetic code, something like that.
So as a neuroscientist, you would say you don't see how that would be possible?
No. Language is still very much a mystery. Again, you see regions leading up, but again, you know, and it seems like, you know, children have a greater capacity to pick up language than adults. It seems like they have an inbuilt capacity for language, which adults struggle more to learn new languages.
Yeah, it's definitely harder to learn a new language later on, just like a musical instrument. It's harder than when you're a kid.
Yeah. I guess the brain is more hardwired and stuff like that when you're an adult.
So we've talked a lot about the complexity of the brain. But what about the mind, Peter? Are they separate things, brain and mind? Are they connected? Walk us through that.
The neuroscience today believe or go along with the idea, not everyone, but mostly because, you know, I guess they want to keep their jobs or something, that you are your brain, and basically the mind is, some believe it's fashionable to say the mind doesn't exist. Some say it's an epiphenomena of the brain, or it's just a result of the physical activity of your brain. But others, and I think it's increasingly so, believe the mind is actually separate from the brain, because you can't explain, while the two are intertwined, there's something you can't explain. Like you can't, because the physicalist view, which is the sort of materialist view of the brain, that we are our brain, it can't explain things like free will, choice, because if we're all programmed everything, there's no such thing as choice. And clearly there is a choice, because a person makes decisions every day which are not determined by your genetic code or pre-programmed. You know, that they feel someone may suddenly get up. Oh, look, I want to go to this shopping centre today, but I want to go over this place. Now they're sort of, it's free will choices, not determined by anything in your brain. So
we're not robots. We don't seem to be.
They're not robots, which ultimately, if you are your brain, you are. And so basically, like again, going back to when I've done neurosurgery, they stimulated the brain, and there's no area which corresponds with any sort of will or free will brain that person decides to choose something. When they stimulate, the person always knows whether it's them doing it. If someone stimulates you to produce some effect, they know that it wasn't them.
Right.
And it wasn't their choice. If they choose something, they know it was them.
Okay.
And it's not, and you can't stimulate people to that. The same with analytical thought, complex thought, like do a mathematical equation inside your head. There's no real known area where you do that sort of thing. There may be if you write the equation down, because you're using your hand, and so your motor movement.
That's right.
So you may have your motor cortex and premotor cortex light up, because you're going to be using that.
But if I just think it.
Yeah, there's no think something abstract or something like that. You may get some areas that light up, but it's not really. But there's no consistent area related to sort of this sort of abstract thinking.
So what's that telling us?
The mind has a mind of its own, in sort of in a way that you're basically, you're not at the mercy of your brain, and basically, if you are your brain, then if you take out a lot of neurons, you expect that to have a dramatic effect on your mind. If you are your brain, then your mind ultimately has to be explained in terms of physics.
Yes.
And if your mind is consistent of brain cells, and if you take a lot of them out, then you expect the mind not to be there. You may be a different person, or if you split the brain, you may be many minds or two minds.
Okay, but what happens if you split the brain? Can you do that?
Yes, you can. You can, because people have had intractable epilepsy,
Intractable
which means
epilepsy.
that you can't. It just continues and it spreads across the whole cortex and basically continue all the time. So it makes it almost impossible to live with it. So you just have these big seizures, and so to stop it going for the other hemisphere, they will sever it by cutting the connection. These 200 milliofibers that interconnect the hemispheres are cut, so severing the connection. And
what does that achieve?
Well, it doesn't achieve that much. You can basically, the person is still, say they're, going back to Michael Egnow's book, he done surgery on that, and basically the person was still the same inner thoughts as before.
Wow.
Same, nothing really changed. The only thing is they do some tricky visual experience where they line things up to the visual field so that they exclude one hemisphere.
Yes.
And then a person may not, if one hemisphere, if it's only displayed to one hemisphere, the person can name the object. If it's the other, the person can reach out to the object, but they can't name it. But you can overcome that by just moving your head. But it's still the same person, same mind.
Can you live without one hemisphere?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot. I won't say a lot, but people do, particularly if they're young. Okay. They've had, as children or really young, they've had people had their entire hemisphere removed, and I mean it's a pretty traumatic thing, of course. But they're still the same person, and the brain starts to adapt. Now,
so they're not brain damaged or anything?
Well, they are brain. There is some damage because obviously some of the connections may be re-established, but it depends on what you take out because you lose information in the sense that say you lose part of your visual cortex, then you don't get the feed in. But you're still the same person. But if you can't, it's like if I close my eyes, I can't see what's happening, but I'm still the same person.
Okay.
And they've been interesting. They've done experiments where, because I thought people in coma can't communicate, but again, it's been documented in some cases, people in deep coma, because you're basically cut off. You can't move. You can't use your senses, and because of severe brain damage, but they've been asked to think, plan something as an answer to a yes and no question.
Okay.
And so they've been repeatedly answered this, and then you do it to control subject, and they can thinking the same thing, the same areas light up for yes and no. So in some patients, you've actually, in deep coma, are actually there. They have their mind. They can actually think, but that it's like you're trapped in some void, But,
wow. How do they know that
they don't have the
coma?
information. They can't interact with the world.
Yeah.
But it was just someone actually testing it out using the latest functional MRI technology. You can get probing some brain regions. So not in all, but in some people have done that. And also you have, I think a notable person is Emilia Clarke from the Game of Thrones. Now, for the record, I've never watched it. I've just seen commercials of it. But apparently she, after she started the series and before it ended, she had brain surgery where a large part of her brain was removed. And apparently she didn't interfere with any part of her life.
She kept filming.
Well, I don't know.
The next seasons.
I guess she would have taken some time to recover, but there's a before and after. She's the same person. So she didn't lose part of her mind. And so people who have that sort of thing, they may have some neurological problems. Yep. They may improve, but they're still the same mind. And I guess sometimes it's how do you define a mind, and that's the thing. I guess the final, which is the final nail in the coffin to the materialist view is the near-death experiences of out-of-body experiences, which kind of where you have people who are essentially are dead, clinically dead, can observe what's going on in the operating theatre, describe it, and be verified by the people in there, and they were not able and it was something that they wouldn't be able to see and because of their conditions. So let me give me an example.
Yes, please.
Again, if you read Michael Egnor's book, Immortal Mind, he gives an example of a lady called Pam Reynolds, who's now dead. But she had a brain aneurysm, which is a swelling in the brain,
Yep.
which fills up, or the blood vessel fills up with fluid and blood. The problem is it can burst. And
That's life-threatening, isn't
yeah,
it?
if it
Yep.
bursts, it'll likely kill or get severe brain damage. So, but you can't really go in there and operate on her like that, the blood vessel, main blood vessel, because that would kind of cause the thing you're trying to prevent.
Right.
So the only way basically to heal her is
Yeah.
to kill her, and to be pretty crudely. So what they did was, first they have to stop the heart, so the person's heart stopped beating, and then they have to make sure the person's brain dead. So there's no activity in the brain, so they'll send them signals like these big audio beeps to look for evoked potential, measure there's no EEG, electrical activity, and then they have to make sure there's no blood in the brain, so I guess they have to make sure the blood drains out of the brain, so then they can go in and basically fix this thing, and they were able to fix it. But what happened afterwards, so they were able to fix that,
Yep.
and then she was able to tell them what was going on in the operating theatre. They were talking about how small the blood vessels were, how she thought it was inappropriate to play Hotel California in the background, and
Wow.
other things, the sound of a drill sawing into her,
an awareness you probably wouldn't want.
No, and things like that. And now these people also have other experience, but I'm just giving you the operating thing.
Okay.
But what it shows is whatever you think about these things, and then that is verified by the people in there. So this Egnor wouldn't have put it out there if he's done 7,000 neurosurgeries if he didn't trust information. But there's a lot of other accounts by secular scientists who actually document a lot of cases. But what it shows is it appears at the point of death, the mind is sort of released from the body, the physical body. The mind doesn't decay as the materialists say.
No, it seems like it's still
the body
going.
and brain does, but the mind does. It's freed. And of course they'll fight tooth and nail this, because you can't have a non-materialist immortal mind surviving the body, evolving. That would have to be...
Doesn't quite work with the theory, does it? It goes in the wrong direction.
That works with that it's God-given, a spiritual soul.
What do you mean by
mind.
that? Okay.
Well, the Bible, God's word, indicates that when a man or woman dies or whatever, that your body does decay, but you have a God-given soul and spirit that lives on, and it's really the kind of not the first death, the body, but the second death that we should worry about. He who controls both body and soul. But the Bible makes it plain that we are not just flesh. We're not a meat robot. We have a eternal, immortal souls. Whether you call it soul or spirit soul or mind, or secularists may call it ghost in the machine. But so we have something that lasts for eternity. You're not going to disappear when you die.
And would you say that some of the examples you've been telling us line up with that?
Yeah, well, I think, if you're looking at the most, as I mentioned, the most complex organisation of matter in the known universe, even as great as the things a man has created, nothing is as great as that. At that level that can do that, it can create itself out of out of one tiny cell. It can build itself, and all those variables, the trillions of connections, the billions of nerve cells, the thousands of different types of cells, all the variables it has to control. It has to build it, and then it has to function. And then on top of that, there's this thing like a mind or a ghost in a machine that sort of seems to be separate from it, or which really doesn't fit any evolutionary materialist explanation. It's not physical, but that's kind of the real you, the things that make the choices, which has the free will, which has the thinking. But the brain and mind in this are intertwined, in a sense. So sometimes it's hard when you talk about one to not be also talking about the other. I often talk about as they are one, as intertwined, but they are I believe they are separate entities, and there is a lot of evidence backing that up.
Peter, you've taken us through the incredible complexity of the brain, so many systems and functions that just defy imagination, really. Why should someone care about this complexity, about this amazing organ, about the mind and the brain and how they function together and seemingly separately?
Well, maybe the best way to illustrate why you should care, because it affects your eternal destinies, is just to give me the last portion of my own experience, personal testimony, if you like.
Okay.
So I was at a stage of life, I kind of didn't really think I needed God in this life, but I believed God existed. And, and I maybe I wait a few years, then I become a Christian, give my life to Christ, because too much to live up now. and I believed in God. I became a creationist, but I wasn't a Christian, if you can believe that. But I was in Los Angeles at the time, staying in a place, and I was reading about the thing and issue and thinking about these questions. And I never want to really remember having dreams or anything like that, but this one night or morning, I just had this remarkable dream. At the time, there was a movie, I hadn't really seen it, but it was called The Never-Ending Story. I don't know if I'd seen any promos of it. And in it was this creature, and I was taken for a ride on this creature across all this beautiful scenery in the world, and it looked fantastic. And then it kind of stopped, and from the distance, I could see there's like a golden lake. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's interesting. What's that? And then it got me closer. I could see it was moving. It looked like gold. Then it took me even closer. But then my sort of, it didn't look good, because it looked, the arms and hands sticking out like if you see at a rock concert, all these people bounded together, their hands sticking out, reaching out, covered in some sort of gold. And then it took closer, but then I nearly fell off this creature and nearly fell in. I managed to grab on by one hand and pull myself up, and then the dream stopped. And then I woke up, and all that day I wasn't sure what it meant, because I wasn't a biblical scholar or anything like that. I knew about hell, but all I could think about that, regardless of whatever, I kept thinking, because I often try to be logical. I'm thinking, well, if I die tomorrow or die today, and then I can spend eternity in hell kicking myself because I didn't make the decision when I could have. And I thought, what can I gain in this world? What's it worth losing my soul over? What monetary gain or anything like that? There's nothing I could think of that was worth that. Nothing could substitute it. So then I basically said, okay, if you're there, God, I'll give you my life.
So that was the moment.
So I gave my life, and it was like a decision time.
Okay.
It wasn't like I was planning to go to church and all this stuff. It wasn't.
Yep.
I was just by myself, working it out. And that's what that's the message, why it matters. It's not that you have to understand the brain, but I think you have to realize who's behind, who created the brain. And then if you understand that he's the one that has your eternal destiny in your hand, and it's your relationship with him. And the Word of God says the Lord Jesus Christ is our creator. He created us, and he's also our Savior, but he's also our judge. And it's only through him that you can get your ticket to heaven. If you confess your mouth, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. And so that's the main thing. Otherwise, there'd be little point of doing this, and so that's why it matters, because it shows you who the real creator is. It's not evolution. That's just a human construct. The real creator is God, but he's also a savior, and he loves us, and he doesn't want anyone to perish, but to be saved and have eternal life. So that's it, yeah.
Wow, Peter, thank you so much for taking us through the complexity of this amazing organ and then helping us understand that there are implications, there are things to think about because we know this.
Okay. Well, it's my pleasure doing it, so thank you.